Hello and welcome to another episode of the ITPro podcast. My name's Adam Shepherd, Reviews and Community Editor.
And I'm Jane McCallion, Features Editor.
So it's been a bit of a week for departures.
So something that happened after we broadcast last week is that Ginny Rometty, the CEO of IBM, has stepped down from her position. And it's an interesting one because I do kind of feel, I remember when both she and Meg Whitman kind of took their roles. They've both left, Meg Whitman a couple of years ago and replaced by Antonio Neri. Ginny Rometty, like we said, just on Friday of last week. And I don't know that, I do get a slight kind of women in tech feel about it because, two high profile female CEOs who are no longer in their positions, both have been replaced by men, which is, that's fine, but it does mean in terms of top level representation, there isn't as much as there used to be.
No, there's not. And, with the best will in the world, there wasn't a huge amount before this.
No.
So it is a bit of a shame to see another kind of tier one top level female CEO departing.
Yeah. Prior to that, the other CEOs who jumped to mind who left within the past sort of like 5 to 10 years, Marissa Mayer, although left under somewhat of a cloud, and,
as it were, but
and Jane Silber of Canonical, who left in 2017. Well, hopefully we'll get some more young blood through, in the coming years. But it's not one of those things. Nobody just kind of enters the workplace and then now they're CEO. Congratulations. Any kind of institutionalized discrimination, it takes a long time to go away. And there are questions over retention of women in tech anyway, so that pool diminishes as time goes on. Yeah, hopefully we'll see some more women leading top tech companies. Again, a bit of a diversity across the board.
And our first news story this week actually concerns another departing CEO, not a female CEO this time, but LinkedIn CEO Jeff Weiner, who is stepping down from his tenure as boss of the professional social network after just over a decade.
Yes, so the 1st of June will be his first day as no longer the CEO of LinkedIn. The Senior Vice President of Product, Ryan Roslansky, will be taking up the position instead. So Weiner oversaw the sale of LinkedIn to Microsoft back in 2016 for a whopping $26 billion. That's a lot of money. It's still a lot of money. Yes, so what do you think about it?
Well, I think, for starters, I'm going to be interested to see how the former CEO of LinkedIn handles job hunting. I mean, yeah, surely it's about as solid a CV as you can get. But I think what's going to be more interesting is to see what, if anything, changes at LinkedIn prior to this. LinkedIn, of course, as you mentioned, notable Microsoft acquisition. And I remember there were a lot of slightly itchy feet at the prospect when the acquisition was initially announced. Of course, at that time, Microsoft did not have the best track record for buying companies and leaving them to do their own thing, shall we say. So there were a lot of people worried that Microsoft was going to, well, for want of a better word, Microsoftify LinkedIn, which, of course, it hasn't. It's left LinkedIn largely to its own devices, short of some behind-the-scenes improvement. Of course, LinkedIn moved over to Azure for its infrastructure in the not-too-distant past, and, there have been various low-level tune-ups to get things running in an optimal way, but it hasn't really changed that much about the core functionality of LinkedIn. And it set the blueprint, really, for acquisitions like GitHub in terms of leaving successful things to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, there's some shuffling going on at Microsoft at the moment in terms of how its business units are structured. It has been announced today as well that it's rolling its hardware and Windows software teams into one. But I don't think that'll affect LinkedIn. I think, like you say, they just kind of, it's doing its thing and they're going to let it continue to do its thing. It doesn't really make sense to put it anywhere else.
No. I do slightly wonder whether or not they're going to up the integrations with various products within the kind of Microsoft ecosystem. So, for example, things like Teams is a prime candidate for that kind of thing. Are they going to introduce better data sharing across Teams, or, more API connections between the two, or things of that nature? Of course, it's impossible to know for sure whether or not Weiner was pushing back on changes that Microsoft wanted to make to LinkedIn.
I think he would have been gone quicker than that. But LinkedIn is very much part of Microsoft. Roslansky will be reporting into Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella in the same way that Weiner did. So it's I think it'll probably be much of the same.
So another entry in the ongoing saga of Huawei's role in UK networks, Vodafone, as it turns out, not content with the UK's decision to give Huawei a limited role in the UK's 5G infrastructure, is ripping out all of Huawei's equipment from the core of its network.
Yes, at a cost of apparently €200 million, which is £169 million. It's going to take 5 years. So part of the issue here, the reason why, regards 5G, and you think, 5G hasn't really rolled out yet anyway, so how is it going to cost all that money if it's something that doesn't exist yet, or exists in kind of small amounts, as far as Vodafone is concerned? The problem is that, as explained by BT's CEO Philip Janssen earlier, when all this was kind of happening first, is that you put 5G stuff on top of 4G things. So all the 4G infrastructure, whatever that is, the original plan was just to use the same manufacturer and bolt it on. If your manufacturer that you were using is Huawei, and they're using more than 35% of the core network, because the whole limit is 35% overall, then you've got a problem, because you have to find another supplier for basically everything, for the vast majority of your mobile network, for all of 4G and going forward 5G. But it's not just a simple kind of like, buy it from somewhere else type thing. It's like, you need the pipes as well as the taps.
It's a very good way of putting it. I don't think this is the first instance of this we're going to see. Of course, BT already doing much the same thing. But I suspect the rest of the UK's network operators are likely to follow suit, because Huawei did have a significant role in the UK's 4G infrastructure, and prior to all of this brouhaha was projected to have a very significant role in its 5G infrastructure as well. And I suspect that most network operators are pretty far along the way in terms of planning their 5G rollouts with Huawei as a major part. So I would not remotely be surprised to see other network operators following this trend.
Yeah, I mean, my question would be, in terms of 5G rollout, what effect is this going to have? Does this mean that 5G is going to be more delayed coming to more areas? Because at the moment it's limited to some of our largest metropolitan areas, which is London, Manchester. 5G, one of its alleged promises is rural connectivity, which I know is my hobby horse, and I'm sure regular listeners probably have figured that this is my hobby horse as well. But if we have to, or if they have to find new suppliers for everything, that surely must have a knock-on effect as far as rollout plans go. I
mean, it must do. It'll be interesting to see how it kind of shakes out over the next 12 to 18 months.
And our final news story is that it turns out people don't like being spied on or tricked or any of that kind of thing.
Surprising. This is based on a survey conducted by independent researchers Tara Wheeler and Roy Iverson, finding that it turns out while pen testing and red teaming are a beloved tactic of the security sector, turns out the rest of the organisation don't much love it. In particular, line of business employees and average workers really object to it.
Yeah, HR and legal in particular are areas where if they are on the end of effectively fake phishing emails or any of that kind of thing, then they find it quite objectionable. And I can understand why, because if you fall for it, and you're in those areas, it's really serious. If this was real, this is really serious. And while the idea, in theory at least, is that it's just to find the holes and then give some training or whatever, that kind of thing. I think if I were on the receiving end of it as well, I'd feel like it was a criticism of my job, effectively. And
absolutely.
I am not surprised at all by these findings.
No, I mean, it must feel, if you are on the receiving end of, a fake phishing email, or, let's say you're a receptionist and somebody bluffs their way past you to get into a secured area. If it was your company conducting a penetration test, that's going to feel like your employer is deliberately trying to trip you up, which, effectively it is. And it would be hard not to feel like you are being judged on, your lack of security awareness or whatever, even if there's no punishment or anything that goes along with that.
Even if you're assured that there's not, surely it would be in the back of your head, like, am I going to be punished for this? Am I going to be fired for this? Is this going to come up in my annual review? Is this going to go on some kind of document that they have on me somewhere?
Yeah.
All that kind of thing. I'd be worried.
And also, no one likes feeling stupid. No one likes feeling like someone's got one over on them.
Yeah, you don't like being tricked.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you get right down to it. Red teaming and penetration testing is professional trickery.
Is it effective, though? Because that's the problem. Like, if it is super effective, then it's a bit like if you go to the dentist, right, you need filling put in your tooth. You've got to have the injections. The injection's smart, but that is the only way to go about dealing with that rotten tooth. So, is red teaming the injection of the security world in your gums, or is it actually a bit more on the bloodletting side of things?
Yeah, red teaming, paracetamol or leeches. If you have any thoughts on the effectiveness or otherwise of red teaming, you can get in touch with us at podcast@itpro.co.uk. Personally, having spoken to and met a few red teamers and penetration testers, some of the things that they can turn up are very serious security holes that I don't think would be discovered if someone wasn't actively going looking for them.
Yeah, and that was a great feature you wrote. We will link to that, the inside the red team feature that you did. Yeah, it's interesting, and the kind of the uniform effect, the clipboard effect that do make people blasé.
So we're going to take a short break now, but after we come back, we will be joined by Stewart Buchanan from Gartner, who will be talking to us about that most dreaded of subjects, Brexit.
See you after the break.
For trustworthy help to live a financially secure life, make more money, and keep more of the money you make, follow the time-tested wealth-building strategies in Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine. It's the magazine that started the entire field of personal finance journalism more than 60 years ago. Since then, Kiplinger's Personal Finance has helped millions of readers achieve financial security in any economic climate. New subscribers save 79% off the cover price. Visit store.kiplinger.com today. That's store.kiplinger.com.
Welcome back. We are joined by Stewart Buchanan, former CIO and now VP analyst for Gartner, focusing on IT financing. Stewart, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's not a very popular topic, Brexit. And it's something that a lot of people in IT organizations that we work with really would rather not have to deal with. But unfortunately, it is happening, and we are trying to raise awareness that action is required. A lot of people think they can just carry on with business as usual. And the one thing we are hearing in the press as part of the negotiations is that business may not be as usual in a year's time. So the first thing, most important thing everybody needs to do is make sure that there is some kind of budget. But how do you know what you have to budget for if the changes haven't even been announced yet? Well, there's a very, very simple approach. And we have to remember that in IT, we are holding a lot of information. And that information tells us who we do business with, both suppliers and customers, and what our exposure is going to be to Brexit. We don't know what the rule changes will be, if any, but I think it's safe to assume that there will be some rule changes. So our job is to prepare to put those changes in place. It may mean tweaking ERP systems. It may mean tweaking financial systems. Our vendors may not be very quick to be able to patch their products because, again, they only have a very short period of time to comply as well. So, I think organizations need to do a risk assessment. All the good things that IT has traditionally been very solidly good at, the analytics, the scenario planning, that's how we need to get some budget in place. In an ideal world, there will be minimal changes and we can spend that budget on more productive things which are going to help our organizations be more successful. But being realistic, we have to plan for the worst and hope for the best.
One of the big concerns was data adequacy. So whether or not we would still be following effectively GDPR, whether we'd still be able to transfer data between the EU and the UK. Now, it looks that while the government has, top line said, we're not going to align with anyone, if you get to the bottom of the statement, it's like, apart from data adequacy, which we do actually quite want to do that. That must be a relief, surely, for a lot of companies to hear that data adequacy, at least we want alignment, so we kind of are in a standstill there.
Well, there's still a risk involved. There's no guarantee we're going to get data alignment or that it's going to buy us anything. We could have data alignment, which simply means that we have to follow GDPR, but we are not on the inside of GDPR. Therefore, we still have to hold data locally. And there has been quite a big boost to data centers and data center spending in the UK, Ireland, Netherlands, lots of places, as a result of people planning for the worst.
Talking of data centers and data center spending, have things got more expensive? I know from some of my contacts in the industry that certain vendors bumped up the price of their hardware virtually the second that the result came through. They're kind of like, well, this all cost 10% more than it did yesterday.
Well, I think it's very easy to use any change as an opportunity to restructure and reprice. And I think this is going to be an opportunity for UK companies also to rethink how they structure and price. And that's part of the planning and the scenarios you have to go into. There are going to be some risks, and you may need to price for those risks.
So thinking about IT equipment and particularly data center infrastructure, can we expect longer shipping delays or lower stock levels for that kind of equipment?
We don't know what to expect, and that's unfortunately the reality. I can't tell you that Clause 13 of the new UK trade agreement is going to read in a particular way. We just don't know at this point. And that's why it's so important to do scenario planning, to be ready and able to hit the button to enact something very quickly and rapidly with very short notice towards the end of this year, simply because we do not know the answer to that question today. And it's a fair answer to say we cannot know the answer to that question today. There are probabilities, and those probabilities are going to become clearer this summer moving forwards. There are a lot of announcements coming in July which are going to clarify some, but definitely not all of these questions. So, it's about analysis, it's about scenario planning, and also, if we negotiate a particular agreement, there's no guarantee that agreement is going to hold or stick and not need renegotiating if it's not working.
Mm.
So, I think if you plan for change change is definitely a certainty. We just don't know what changes need to be enacted or when at this point.
The only certainty is that nothing is certain.
Exactly, and that everything is likely to change at some point, including our businesses, business revenues in some cases. Yeah, there is no business as usual here. So we need to forget planning for business as usual and focus on planning for business change.
Yeah.
Well, in that respect, so, I mean, you're saying that July, we should have some further clarity. That's only 5 months from the end of the transition period. Should IT leaders, I guess, be lobbying for larger budgets to have a bit of a buffer in case you do need to make short-term, or not short-term changes, but
you can
changes very quickly?
You can ask, but unless the business sees an upside in those changes, they're very unlikely to give you more money. And that's the important point. You know, the businesses are being challenged. You know, their revenues, in some cases you can justify it because a new business opportunity is going to create a new revenue stream. Yeah. And everyone's been focusing on the downside about trade with Europe. We need to focus more on the upside of what we're going to be spending on to improve our trade outside Europe in future. If we're able to negotiate our own independent trade agreements with lots of other countries, we need to start planning for those scenarios now and thinking about where those opportunities are and what IT do we need to support them. And maybe we need less IT to support trade in Europe if that trade is going to be subject to barriers. So it's about redirecting business. It's about business agility. And ultimately, it's about IT agility and the fact that we're going to be able to do these things in a significant hurry. And that doesn't come cheap. You know, if you want to do something quickly, you're not going to do it as cheaply.
So speaking of the redirecting of trade, one of the things that I've been wondering about, certainly, is will British IT vendors see a boost as a result of any trade friction, let's say, or shipping friction with Europe? You know, obviously, most of the major tier one tech vendors base their distribution out of various European locations for, you know, a number of reasons. But will, let's say, data center hardware vendors like Scan or like Broadbury, both of which have, large UK bases, are those companies and others like them likely to see uplifts from companies wanting to skirt around those frictions?
Well, I think, again, that is going to be a potential upside. But if we are going to see tighter border controls and potential tariffs being imposed, then it's all about the location of stock. And any short-term advantages you're going to get by having stockpiles of stock have to be weighed up against the risks. And we've already played this game. Last year, a lot of organizations stockpiled. They didn't get a return on that stock holding. They ended up selling it off cheap in some cases. And all it did was shift the amount of carrying cost, the amount of working capital that they had available. And whether or not that's a good idea to make those kind of trade-offs this time around, I think that has to be a very open question, and once bitten, twice shy in most cases.
When thinking about where to invest your money, there's always, I think that anything is an opportunity to go on-premise or cloud. So I'm going to take that opportunity right now and say, should businesses, if they have to go one way or the other, should they be investing more in, say, using cloud platforms in order to enable maybe more remote working? Or is it a time to think, right, actually, seeing as how data transfer and all that kind of thing is a little bit, we're not sure how it's going to work, do you invest in more on-premise small data center or large data center if you're a large business hardware?
Well, you need to make those decisions now, because if you're doing something on-premise, it's going to take a time to build. I think the later you leave it, the more you're making a conscious decision to use the cloud. Again, which cloud and in which country and which location is a very important decision. If you want to minimize the risks to your organization, then you're going to want to go localized as much as possible with all personal and private data.
Do you think that the data residency controls offered by the kind of major cloud providers and SaaS providers are likely to be, with the caveat that we don't have a kind of firm vision of what the data transfer restrictions are going to look like. What do you think the likelihood is of those data residency and transfer controls being sufficient?
Well, are controls ever sufficient? I think is a very, very important question. Really, we do not know what is going to happen here. We have to plan for different scenarios. And if you are planning for the worst and hoping for the best, then your plan for the worst is that you're going to have to keep as much data as possible localized. If the European Union decided that more countries wanted to leave and still had to comply with GDPR for a little while, then you would have to keep even more data localized in those countries. On the other hand, if more people want to join the European Union, then it would actually broaden those possibilities. So, I think it comes back to agility at the end of the day. How quickly can you move? And it's a lot slower to move a physical data center that you built yourself and offload the premises to somebody than it is to switch cloud provider. And one thing Gartner's been advising clients for decades, really, is don't put all your eggs in one basket, or if you do, have a plan to move them.
The sense I'm getting from this is that businesses need to be prepared to make, as you say, kind of rapid changes to their business. To that end, would you say that businesses need almost a separate Brexit war chest?
Well, where does that war chest comes from? It reminds me of a cartoon of a few political leaders boasting about the size of their war chests, and they're both empty. So, where's this money going to come from? I'm an IT financial management guy. My job is to help people find the money, but it doesn't grow on trees. It isn't something that the government has decided we're going to create all this new money just for Brexit. Yes, we are seeing positive movements and shifts in government spending, trying to end austerity and all these kinds of things, lots of announcements on this. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to create a Brexit fund and give out free money to everyone who has to make any changes. And obviously some industries could potentially come off worst from the negotiations. We don't know for sure, but there are some industries where clients are extremely worried. I think the technology sector also has good reason to worry if some of these key issues which are important to us don't get resolved by the end of the year.
Is there an opportunity here for managed service providers to kind of step in and help be the typical trusted partner type thing in the context of Brexit, help guide people through where it might be a good place to put their money, what their strategy should be?
Well, I think from a buyer perspective, how do you really know what you're buying in those cases? Yes, there are lots of people selling you their services to help and who can help. But I think until the customer base gets its act together, gets a clear strategy ahead of, how do we develop a strategy for the fact we don't know what's going to happen? How do we address enterprise agility? Then these partners who can provide that agility aren't going to get engaged. I'm hoping that's going to happen over the next few months, and Gartner's definitely campaigning for all our clients, wherever you're headquartered. If you do business in the UK, or if you're in the UK and do business elsewhere, then you absolutely need to start addressing these issues. And there are no easy answers. You have to do the information analysis, work out your risks and exposures, and then start to put together a plan together of what you're going to do about it to minimize those risks and exposures and potentially generate some upside for your organization. If you take cost to a CEO, they're not interested. If you take business opportunity to the CEO, then you're more likely to get more money. And I think that's really the message that managed service providers have to take. That's a tough thing to do with so much uncertainty right now.
We're almost out of time, unfortunately. But in your opinion, how can businesses work to minimize disruption to their IT operations in the face of all this uncertainty?
Well, I think you have to create certainty by deciding what it is you're going to do in a very variable set of business circumstances. And if that is the decision, being able to become more agile, being able to change things more rapidly, planning those changes, preparing them, being ready for making those potentially radical changes to your business, I think that is absolutely what we need to do. Business as usual has gone away. We have to look at what we do for business as unusual, as standard now in every organization.
That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Stewart, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be invited.
You can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes and even more on our website www.itpro.co.uk.
You can follow us on Twitter at ITPro, as well as on Facebook and LinkedIn, and subscribe to the ITPro newsletter.
Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find podcasts to never miss an episode.
Also, please take a second to rate this podcast on Apple Podcasts, as it really helps us get discovered by more people to share the IT love.
We'll be back next week with more news and analysis from the world of IT. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.